Hi everyone, so welcome back to my channel on YouTube. I put up videos every Monday and Thursday. If you're a new subscriber, hi, welcome along. If you're returning, thank you very much. So my name's Caroline, I'm a lecturer in nuclear physics at a UK university. I'm also the physics admissions tutor. I've had a look at my YouTube videos over the last couple of weeks and I can see that people are really interested in the one to do with open book exams. And I suspect that's because we're about to enter university exam season. So if you're an undergraduate student, if you're a taught master's student, most likely you'll be having examinations coming up in the next few weeks. And in this video, I thought we could talk a little bit about how to maximise your chance of performing well actually in the exam. Exam papers are really all about chasing marks. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're in there to get as many marks as you can from the exam paper that you're facing. And it's really important, therefore, not to get stuck looking at the same question and using up all your precious exam time trying to get one question perfect, especially if it doesn't carry that many marks. It's really important in an exam to keep yourself moving. So if you get stuck on the very first question, take a deep breath, get onto the second one. And if that one's too difficult, get onto the third one. Keep moving through that paper and writing down as many answers as you can, and then hopefully you'll have time at the end to come back and tackle some of the ones that you get stuck on. In questions, sometimes you might get a little hint, so they might say use this particular equation or use this graph, and that kind of directs you to the way that you need to be thinking to answer that question. So if they've given you a graph, it might be that you have to take the gradient of the graph or the area underneath the graph, or maybe you need to look at a particular peak, or maybe there's a turning point or an inflection point. So when you get presented with a graph and they ask you to use it, pause and then try to work out which aspect of the graph that you need to use. Look at the units, look at what the axis labels are. That might give you a hint as to how to tackle the question. The same thing when you do an equation and you're working through your answer. You can do something called dimensional analysis at the end. That helps you check that your dimensions make sense, and therefore you know that maybe your equation that you rearranged was correct. So these are things you can do when you've got an answer to see if your answer feels right. You can also use your kind of gut instinct. You know, if you're asked to calculate a distance between two planets and you get a very small number of meters, that's not going to feel right. So you know that somewhere you will have dropped a power, or maybe you've used a unit incorrectly. So when you get your answer, stop for a second, and before you race on to the next question, pause and go, does that answer actually feel correct? Is it the right magnitude? Has it got the right units? Do my dimensions make sense? And that will help you then before you whiz on to the next question, so you don't lose kind of silly marks by putting down the wrong units or something. Talking of getting marks, in order to get marks on a science paper, quite often you need to show you're working. So if you've got a question and it's a 10-mark derivation and it says go from this point to this point, you need to show your steps in between, because it's the steps that will be carrying the marks. So if you're moving through a derivation, don't forget to put any assumptions in that you've used, or any limits that maybe tend to infinity or tend to zero. Write down those comments in your paper, because your examiner, when they're marking it, will then be able to see your logic and your flow moving through your answer. Now, typically an exam paper will be between an hour and 3 hours long. It might be different for you this year if you're doing your examinations by remote working. Your university might have allowed you to have a 24-hour window or a 48-hour window to complete that examination paper. But make sure you know how long you've got to take the test. And then the next thing is make sure you know how many questions you actually have to answer. I really remember one exam paper where I opened it up and I thought, okay, I've got to answer 2 out of 3 questions. And I didn't like the look of the first question, and I didn't like the look of the second question, and I didn't like the look of the third question. And that feeling of dread of, oh no, I've got to try to write some answers down and I'm just not liking any of these questions. So what you need to do is take a few moments at the start of the exam paper to work out which questions you have to answer and which ones you're going to pick if you have a selection. And then something that I think students, and I certainly felt this when I was a student, we often think you have to do, is answer the questions in the order they appear in the exam paper. And that's not actually the case. You know, just because it says section A, questions 1 to 5, section B, pick 2 out of 3, You don't have to do A1 first, then A2, then A3, then A4, A5. You can choose which question you want to start with. So say you're most concerned about answering the longer questions or writing the essay or doing the more involved questions. If they're the second part of the paper, you could still elect to answer those questions first and then do the shorter questions. So don't feel you have to tackle the questions in the order that they appear in the paper. Unless, of course, you're doing an electronic test where maybe you have to answer a question and then it releases the next question and then the next question. This is a bit of a silly one, but don't forget to look at every page of the exam paper. It's horrific if you get to the end of the paper and then realise you missed out a page of questions. So again, as an initial start check, just make sure when you filled in your ID at the front, flick through that paper, see how many of the questions there are, make sure you know if there's any blank pages in the test paper, are there any questions on the back page, do you have any helpful formulae that's given to you at the front of the booklet, just to kind of make yourself familiar with the test paper that's in front of you so you feel more comfortable that you're knowing what you have to answer and making sure that you answer all of the questions. Exams are quite hard because you want to keep yourself in like a kind of zen relax mode, but you can't get too relaxed because you're fighting the clock in order to get as many answers down as you can. But if you get yourself really kind of wound up about it, it's very hard to think clearly and logically and write down the answers to your best of your ability. So if you are nervous, and it's absolutely fine to be nervous, you want to try to think of some techniques you can do within that exam to help calm yourself, lower the heart rate, stop yourself feeling so jittery, because that will help you be able to focus and actually really tackle the paper that's in front of you. So that could be just deep breathing, it could just be closing your eyes for a few seconds, it could be having a sip of water, it could be making sure all your pens are nicely laid out on the table in front of you. Anything that helps you relax, focus, calm yourself a little bit, because then you're going to get the best chance of performing well in that exam paper. It can be really hard as well to judge how well you've done in a test. Sometimes you'll walk out and you'll think the test was terrible and it turns out it went okay, and sometimes you think the test went really well and maybe it didn't go quite as well as you would have liked it to have gone. So I'm not entirely sure that chatting to friends about how they found the test afterwards is actually that helpful. I mean, you can't change anything, you can't do anything different with your test paper. I used to always take the test, walk out the room, say cheerio to my friends, and then kind of move on to the next test and not dwell too much on the one that I just completed. And I know it'll be a bit strange at the moment because often you'll be taking your papers remotely, so you might not actually see your friends afterwards. I'd just be cautious about jumping into too many virtual chat rooms and dissecting a test paper, because I'm not really sure that will really help you feel better or worse about what you've just completed. I think it's probably better just to say that test has been completed and put your attention onto the next test or assignment that you're tackling. So I'd love to know your thoughts about what you find relaxes you at the start of an exam. So if you have any tips of things that you do that helps you feel calm and focused at the start of an exam paper, pop them in the comments, because I think what works for you might really help somebody else who's also facing exam nerves. Lots of good luck with any examinations coming up. If you're interested, we could do a video about how to get ready for exam day. So we could look at the week before an exam and last minute revision and things you can do to help yourself get ready to do really well in that exam. So we're creeping up towards 100 subscribers, which is really exciting. I feel like we should do something when we hit 100. I haven't quite worked out what yet. If you have any suggestions, feel free to shove them in the comments and I'll have a think about it. But do subscribe and like the video. It's interesting to see which videos you're watching, because it means I can tailor content going forwards to things that are relevant to you and the semester and where we are in the university cycle. But have a great week. Make sure you get some relaxation time across the weekend, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye.